Good afternoon. Today, we bring you a story that has been erased from history textbooks, a story of systematic persecution, cultural genocide, and religious terrorism that lasted 252 years. This is a story of the Goan Inquisition, one of the most brutal chapters in colonial history.
Between 1560 and 1812, the Portuguese colonial administration, with the full backing of the Catholic Church, unleashed a reign of terror in Goa. Hindus were forcibly converted, temples were destroyed, and those who resisted faced torture, imprisonment, and death.
We will take you through the three critical phases. First, the golden age of the Hindu Goan community before the Portuguese arrived. Second, the horrific 252 years of the Inquisition. And third, the aftermath that continues to impact Hindus even today.
But here's the most shocking part. Very few Hindus today know about this genocide. The history has been whitewashed, the evidence has been destroyed, and the perpetrators were never brought to justice.
Today, we break that silence. This is the Goan Inquisition, a forgotten genocide.
Let's begin at the beginning. Before the Portuguese invasion in 1510, Goa was a thriving center of Hindu civilization. To understand what we lost, we must first understand what Goa was.
Goa's recorded history goes back over 2,000 years. The Usgalimal rock engravings dating to the Upper Paleolithic period are among the earliest traces of human settlement in the ancient Hindu civilization. By the time the Common Era began, Goa was already a sophisticated society.
Let's look at the dynasties that ruled Goa. First, we had the Mauryan Empire, 3rd century BCE. Under Chandragupta Maurya, Goa was incorporated into the province of Aparanta. Buddhism was also introduced during this period.
Second, let's look at the Satyavahana dynasty. This was established during the maritime power and trade connections with Roman Empire. Greek and Roman ships would halt in Goa during their voyages.
And we had the Bhojas, the 2nd century BC to 4th century CE. They ruled for over 500 years with their capital at ancient Chandrapur, modern-day Chandor.
But it was the Kadamba dynasty that truly established Goa as a cultural powerhouse.
The Kadambas ruled from the 10th to the 14th century. Under their rule, Goa became known as Gopaka Patana, a major port city with trade connections to Zanzibar, Bengal, Gujarat, and Sri Lanka.
Contemporary records describe Gopakapatna as not just aesthetically pleasing, but spiritually cleansing. The city was cosmopolitan, with influences from many cultures reflected in its architecture and art.
The port was served by an important highway called Rajvithi or Rajpath. For over 300 years, it remained a center for intra-coastal and transoceanic trade from Africa to Malaya.
Now let's talk about the Hindu religion and culture in Goa. Goa was predominantly Hindu, and the Kadamba kings were devout Shaivites, worshippers of Lord Shiva. They built magnificent temples across Goa.
They patronized the Hindu religion and performed major Hindu rituals. They also supported Jainism. Sanskrit and Kannada were the languages of administration. And also Konkani and Marathi were also widely spoken in Goa back then.
Education flourished. Ancient universities called Brahmaputris were established where Vedas, astrology, philosophy, medicine, and other subjects were taught. These were found in many places across Goa.
The Mahadeva temple at the Tamdi, Surla, built during the 12th century, still stands today, one of the few surviving medieval temples in Goa. Most others were destroyed in what was to come.
In 1370, Goa came under the Vijayanagara Empire, a resurgent Hindu state controlling much of the south. Goa's harbors were important ports for Arabian horses, destined for the Vijayanagara cavalry.
And this was the Goa that existed before 1510, a land of temples, learning, and prosperity, a land where the Hindu civilization had flourished for over a millennium.
But in 1510, everything changed. The Portuguese arrived, and Goa would never be the same again.
On March 4, 1510, Portuguese Admiral Afonso de Albuquerque launched an attack on Goa. The territory was then under the rule of the Bijapur Sultanate.
Interestingly, the Portuguese were assisted by the Hindu Vijayanagara Empire's regional agent, Timmaya, in their attempt to capture Goa from the Muslim Adil Shah. The Hindus thought they were being liberated from Muslim rule.
Little did they know they were jumping from the frying pan into the fire.
After the Portuguese conquest, Goa became the center of Portuguese colonial possessions. But the Portuguese had come with three objectives, what they called the three Gs: God, gold, and glory.
The God part is what concerns us today. Pope Nicholas V issued the papal bull Romanus Pontifex, granting Portugal the monopoly right and patronage for the propagation of Catholic Christian faith in newly discovered areas.
This was called the Padroadro system. It mandated the building of churches and support for Catholic missions and evangelism activities. The Jesuits were the most active religious order under the mandate.
Initially, the Portuguese offered incentives for Hindus and Muslims to convert to Christianity. By 1548, 14 churches had been completed in the colony.
But then came the man who would change everything, Francis Xavier.
In 1542, Francis Xavier arrived in Goa. Today, he is revered as Saint Francis Xavier, the patron saint of Goa's Christian community. But his role in what followed is deeply controversial.
On January 20th, 1545, Xavier wrote a letter to King John III of Portugal from Malacca. Let me read you exactly his words. Quote, "The second necessity which obtains in India, if those who live there are to be good Christians, is that your Highness should institute the Holy Inquisition. For there are many who live according to the laws of Moses or the law of Muhammad without any fear of God or shame before men."
He was asking for the Inquisition to be established in Goa. But he went even further. He threatened the Portuguese governor with severe punishment if he failed to spread Christianity.
Listen to this. Quote, "Let the king warn the governor that should he fail to take active steps for the great increase of our faith, we are determined to punish him. Tell him that you will keep him in irons for a number of years. There is no better way of ensuring that all of India becomes Christian than that your Highness should inflict severe punishment on a governor." End quote.
This was not a message of love and compassion. This was a call for religious imperialism backed by state violence.
Now, defenders of Francis Xavier argue that he left Goa in 1545, and the Inquisition was established formally in 1560, 15 years later. They say he cannot be held responsible.
But that's like saying someone who calls for violence is not responsible when that violence actually happens. Xavier planted the seed. He created the ideological foundation. The Inquisition was the inevitable result.
Even before the formal Inquisition began, persecution had started. On June 30th, 1541, a Portuguese order was issued to destroy Hindu temples and seize their properties for Catholic missionaries.
On March 8, 1546, King John III ordered the Portuguese viceroy in Goa to destroy Hindu temples, stop Hindu practices, including worship of idols and celebrations of Hindu festivals and evict Brahmins from the Portuguese territory.
A new Christian was executed in 1539 for heretical utterances. In 1543, Geronimo Diaz was garroted and burnt at the stake for the religious crime of Judaism, practicing Judaism in secret.
The stage was set, the machinery of death was being assembled, and in 1560 it was officially unleashed.
On March 2nd, 1560, Cardinal Henrique of Portugal sent Alexio Diaz Falaco as the first inquisitor and established the first tribunal. The Goa Inquisition office was housed in the former palace of Sultanate Adil Shah.
Now, let's be very clear about what this Inquisition was. It was not just about religious conversion. It was about a total cultural annihilation.
Let me read you some of the orders issued by the Goan Inquisition. On temples, Hindu temples were demolished across Portuguese Goa. Hindus were forbidden from building new temples or repairing old ones. A temple demolition squad of Jesuits was formed, and a 1569 royal letter recorded all Hindu temples in Portuguese colonies have to be demolished and burnt down.
Let that sink in. All temples, Hindu temples, demolished and burned. By 1567, over 300 Hindu temples had been destroyed.
On religious practices, Hindus were forbidden from practicing any Hindu rituals. They were forbidden from worshipping idols or celebrating Hindu festivals. Private deity worship was also banned, and Hindu priests were forbidden from entering Portuguese Goa to officiate Hindu weddings.
On unemployment and property, all Qadis, the Muslim judges, were ordered out of Portuguese territory in 1567. Non-Christians were forbidden from occupying any public office. Only Christians could hold government positions. Hindus were forbidden from producing any Christian devotional objects.
On inheritance and conversion, Hindu children whose fathers had died were required to be handed over to Jesuits for forced conversion to Christianity. Hindu women who converted to Christianity could inherit all property of their parents, and this created a perverse incentive system designed to break Hindu families apart.
On governance, Hindu clerks in all village councils, village decisions without Hindu presence. Hindus could not make any decisions unless all Christians were present. In villages with Christian majorities, Hindus were forbidden from attending village assemblies.
On legal rights, in legal proceedings, Hindus were unacceptable as witnesses. Only statements from Christian witnesses were admissible, and Christians signed first on proceedings, then Hindus.
Do you see what was happening here? This wasn't just religious persecution. This was systematic apartheid based on religion.
On culture and language, the Konkani language was restricted, Sanskrit was prohibited, Hindu books in Sanskrit and Marathi were burned. The inquisitors seized and burned thousands of ancient Hindu manuscripts.
Imagine this, thousands of years of accumulated knowledge, philosophy, science, and literature burned, forever lost to humanity.
On daily life, Hindus were forced to assemble periodically in churches to listen to Christian doctrine. They were made to listen to criticisms of their own religion, and wearing a traditional clothing like the pudvam was outlawed, and playing local musical instruments was forbidden.
Even clothing and music were criminalized. This was cultural genocide in its purest form. Now, you might ask, what happened to those who violated these laws? What punishments did they face?
The punishments ranged from fines and public flogging to banishment to Mozambique, imprisonment, and execution. The preferred method of execution was burning at the stake.
The public spectacle of punishment was called auto da fe, act of faith. Between 1562 and 1773, there were 71 recorded auto da fe in Goa.
Now let's talk about the scale. How many people were affected?
Approximately brought to trial.
To put of whom about 20,000 were Hindus. So nearly 80% of the Hindu population was put on trial over 2 centuries.
Between 1561 and 1623 alone, 3,800 cases were brought before the tribunal. That's an average of nearly 62 cases per year in the early phase.
Now, how many were executed? According to historian Machado, in its 252 years of existence, 57 people were burned at the stake, 64 were burned in effigy, either they had died in prison or were convicted in absentia, and 4,046 others were sentenced to various punishments.
Some might say 57 executions over 252 years is not that many, but that's missing the entire point.
First, these are the only recorded executions at formal auto da fe, but many more died in prison from torture, disease, and starvation. Many were killed during temple demolitions. Many died fleeing persecution.
Second, when the Inquisition ended in 1812, Portuguese officials deliberately destroyed.
Execution was only one form of violence: forced conversion, cultural erasure, economic discrimination, and psychological torture affected hundreds of thousands.
And by the end of the 17th century, it is estimated that there were less than 20,000 non-Christians out of a total Goan population of 250,000. That's less than 8%.
Remember, Goa was overwhelmingly Hindu before 1510. By 1700, Hindus had become a tiny minority in their own homeland, their ancestral land. This is demographic genocide.
The Inquisition forced Hindus to flee Goa in large numbers. They escaped to neighboring territories not under Portuguese control, where they built new temples using the deities rescued from the demolished shrines.
Even today, many Goan Hindu families conduct annual processions linking their new temples to the sites where old temples once stood, sites now occupied by churches built by the Portuguese.
From the 1590s onwards, the Goan Inquisition was the most intense, as practices like offerings to local deities were perceived as witchcraft. This became the central focus of the Inquisition in the East in the 17th century.
Now we come to the darkest part of this story: the methods of torture and persecution used during the Goan Inquisition.
The Goan Inquisition has been described by historians as, quote, the most violent inquisition ever executed by the Portuguese Catholic Church, unquote. It was called, quote, a machinery of death, unquote.
Writer Richard Zimler documented these horrors in his book Guardian of the Dawn. He called it one of the most horrific events in history.
Dr. Dillon, a Frenchman who was himself a victim of the Goan Inquisition, wrote a detailed account of the torture methods. His narrative describes the violence and brutality in chilling detail.
Let me describe some of the methods. In the prison cells, the Inquisition headquarters had hundreds of prison cells. These were dark, damp dungeons where accused persons were kept for months or years awaiting trial.
The torture during interrogation. The suspects were stripped naked and beaten. The strapado, victims were hung by their wrists, tied behind their backs and dislocating their shoulders. Water torture, similar to modern waterboarding. The rack, victims' bodies were stretched until joints dislocated, burning with hot irons.
Now, starvation and disease. Prisoners were given minimal food and water. Many died from starvation, disease, and infected wounds from torture before they could even be tried.
The auto de fe spectacle now. This was the public ceremony where sentences were announced and carried out. It was designed to humiliate and terrify.
The procession included the chief inquisitor, Dominican friars, Portuguese soldiers, the condemned wearing San Benito's, the penitential garments, and those to be executed wore garments with flames painted on them.
Burning at the stake, victims were tied to a stake and burnt alive. This was not a quick death. The fires were often deliberately set to burn slowly, prolonging the agony.
Sometimes, if victims recanted at the last moment, they were shown mercy. They were garroted, strangled, before being burned. This was considered an act of compassion.
The family persecution. The persecution didn't end with the individual. Families of those convicted were stigmatized. Their property was confiscated. Their children were taken away.
Crypto-Hindus, those who had been forcibly converted but secretly practiced Hinduism, faced special brutality. They were seen as the worst kind of heretics.
The paranoia was extreme. People were encouraged to inform on their neighbors, friends, and even family members. Anonymous denunciations were accepted and acted upon.
Wealthy Hindu families were particularly targeted. Why? Because when someone was convicted, their property was confiscated by the church and the colonial administration.
The Inquisition became a tool of economic exploitation. Accusations of heresy were sometimes manufactured simply to seize property.
What's particularly chilling is how systematic this was. The Portuguese created detailed bureaucratic procedures for arrest, interrogation, trial, and execution. This was industrialized persecution.
And here's something that gets overlooked. The psychological torture was perhaps worse than the physical. Imagine living in constant fear, not knowing if your neighbor will inform on you, not knowing if practicing your religion in privacy of your own home will lead to your death.
Parents had to hide their beliefs from their own children, fearing the children might innocently reveal them. Families were torn apart, communities were destroyed, trust was shattered.
But Hindus did not go quietly. There was resistance, there was resilience.
Many Hindus fled to territories outside Portuguese control. They established new settlements and built new temples.
Some practiced their religion in secret, keeping the flame of Hindu Dharma alive despite the risk of death. These Hindus maintained their faith through code, symbol, and subterfuge.
When temples were demolished, devotees would risk their lives to rescue the sacred deities. They would carry these murtis to safe locations and install them in new temples.
Even today, some of Goa's most famous temples, like the Shantadurga temple in Quella, the Mangesh temple in Mangeshi, and the Mahalsa temple, resistance. Historical records show instances of Hindus refusing to convert despite torture, dying as martyrs to their faith.
The very fact that Hinduism survived in Goa, that Hindu culture persists even till today, is itself a form of victory. The Inquisition failed in its ultimate goal, a complete eradication of Hinduism from Goa.
In 1774, the Goa Inquisition was temporarily abolished by the Marquis de Pombal, a Portuguese reformer. All prisoners were released.
For 4 years, there was relief. But in 1778, after Pombal's fall from power, the Inquisition was reinstated.
It continued until June 16, 1812, when it was finally and permanently abolished by royal order. The Inquisition had lasted 252 years, minus the 4 years gap.
Why did it end? Not because of a moral awakening. The Inquisition in the Iberian Peninsula itself was waning by the early 19th century. Portugal was changing politically.
But even after 1812, discrimination against Hindus under Portuguese rule continued in other forms.
The exindidi tax, similarly to the Islamic jizya tax, was imposed on Hindus from 1705 to 1840. This was a special tax that only non-Christians had to pay. Religious discrimination only formally ended with the introduction of secularism
the civil code of Goa and Daman, also to say that it ended.
But by then, the damage had been done. Hindu civilization in Goa had been devastated. The demographic transformation was irreversible.
Now, let's talk about the aftermath. What were the long-term consequences of the Goan Inquisition?
Before Portuguese rule, Goa was overwhelmingly Hindu. Today, Christians make up about 25% of Goa's population, while Hindus are about 66%. This transformation happened primarily during the Inquisition period.
Hundreds of temples were destroyed. Thousands of Hindu manuscripts were burned. Ancient Hindu knowledge systems were forever lost. Entire Hindu art forms disappeared. Languages were suppressed.
Now let's talk about the psychological impact. For generations, Goan Hindus lived with trauma. Many families don't even know their own history because ancestors were forced to convert. Family records were destroyed.
And here's the most sinister part. This history has been systematically erased. Go to most history textbooks. You will find extensive coverage of the Spanish Inquisition, but the Goan Inquisition, barely a mention.
Why? Because when the Inquisition ended, Portuguese officials destroyed most of its records. Without documentary evidence, historians can't fully reconstruct what happened.
The few records that survived were kept in Portuguese archives, inaccessible to the Hindu scholars for decades. Even today, much remains untranslated and unstudied.
Let's look at the continued discrimination. Even after independence in 1947, when Goa was still under Portuguese rule until 1961, discrimination continued.
And after liberation in 1961, there were calls for reconstruction of the destroyed temples, but many church authorities opposed this, arguing it would disturb communal harmony.
The world knows about the Holocaust. The world knows about the Armenian genocide. The world knows about the Rwandan genocide.
But how many people know about the Goan Inquisition? How many people know that 16,000 people were put on trial for the crime of being a Hindu?
This is not just about history. This is about justice. This is about acknowledgement. When crimes against humanity are forgotten, when victims are denied recognition, it sends a message that some lives matter less than others.
Now the question of accountability. No one was ever held accountable for the Goan Inquisition, not the Portuguese crown, not the Catholic Church, not the inquisitors who ordered the torture and executions.
There has been no official apology from Portugal. There has been no acknowledgement from the Catholic Church. The perpetrators are long dead, but institutions persist.
Compare this to how Germany has dealt with the Holocaust. Museums, memorials, education, programs, reparations. Germany has made remembrance a national day.
Where is the memorial for the victims of the Goan Inquisition? Where is the museum documenting these crimes? Where are the educational programs?
Now we come to a painful question. Why don't most Hindus know about the Goan Inquisition? Why do they not know about their own history of persecution?
And there are several reasons. All of them point to systematic historical erasure.
Reason number one, the destruction of records. When the Goan Inquisition ended in 1812, Portuguese officials deliberately destroyed most of the records. This was not accidental. This was intentional erasure of evidence.
Without primary source documents, historians have to rely on fragmentary evidence, second-hand accounts, and scattered references. This makes comprehensive reconstruction difficult.
And reason number two, the colonial education system. The British colonial education system in Bharat was designed to glorify the European civilization and minimize indigenous achievements. British historians often downplayed Portuguese atrocities to maintain European solidarity.
After independence, India's education system was influenced by Marxist historians who were uncomfortable with the narratives of religious persecution because it complicated their theories about class struggle being the primary driver of history. And this is seen everywhere across the globe. Everywhere in where religious persecution is taught, you will not find anything about the Goan Inquisition. Despite hearing so much about other religious persecutions, you will never hear in any textbook about the Goan Inquisition.
And reason number 3, the secular or the so-called secular politics. In post-independent India, discussing historical persecution of Hindus became politically incorrect. There was fear that acknowledging such history would inflame communal tensions.
So the solution was silence. Don't talk about it. Don't teach it. Let it fade from memory. This was called secular politics, but it was historical denial.
And reason number 4, language barriers. Many of the surviving records of the Goan Inquisition are in Portuguese, Latin, or other European languages. For decades, the scholars didn't have access to these archives or the language skills to study them.
And for 5th, the church influence. The Catholic Church wields considerable influence in Goa even until today, and in international academia. There has been institutional resistance to full disclosure and research about the Inquisition.
Reason number 6, trauma and shame. For families whose ancestors were forcibly converted, there's a deep trauma and sometimes shame associated with this history. It's easier to forget than to remember.
And the lack of advocacy. And reason number 7. Unlike the Jewish community, which has powerful organizations documenting and publicizing the Holocaust and bringing recognition and awareness to it, Hindus have lacked similar institutional support for documenting their own history of persecution. It's only due to the Supreme Pontiff of Hinduism's single effort through KAILASA that even the Hindu persecution anywhere in the globe is brought to international platforms. It is only because of the Supreme Pontiff of Hinduism's tireless work that we here today are even understanding or hearing about the Goan Inquisition. Otherwise, it would be forgotten from Hindus in the modern day.
So until very recently, there was no systematic effort to document the Goan Inquisition, no major films, no major book in popular media, no international campaigns. This brings us to a crucial point. In recent years, one voice has been constantly raising awareness about the broader pattern of persecution of Hindus worldwide. And that voice belongs to the Supreme Pontiff of Hinduism, Bhagwan Nityananda Paramashivam.
The Supreme Pontiff of Hinduism, Bhagwan Sri Nityananda Paramashivam, has taken up the cause of documenting and publicizing the historical persecution of Hindus across the globe, including in the Goan Inquisition.
Through KAILASA, the United Ancient Enlightened Indigenous Hindu Civilizational Nations, the Supreme Pontiff of Hinduism has been working to bring global attention to the Hindu Holocaust.
Now, there may be some viewers who may be skeptical. They may have heard something negative in the news about KAILASA, but let us understand this.
The Supreme Pontiff of Hinduism has faced extensive persecution just for reviving KAILASA, the only Hindu nation for the persecuted Hindus. In 2010, a deepfake video was created and broadcast by certain media houses such as Sun TV and Nakiran to defame the Supreme Pontiff of Hinduism. False cases were filed. The Supreme Pontiff of Hinduism was illegally imprisoned without evidence.
But here are the facts. Multiple courts in India and in the United States have cleared the Supreme Pontiff of Hinduism of all allegations. In the US, 4 federal state courts absolved him of all charges more than a decade ago. The false accusers were subjected to legal sanctions, including imprisonment and monetary fines exceeding $6 million.
And in February 2024, the Ramanagara Indian Court acknowledged the crimes committed by the co-conspirators against the Supreme Pontiff of Hinduism and KAILASA. Arrest warrants were issued against the creators of the defamatory video.
Despite this legal vindication, media outlets have not publicized this exoneration of the Supreme Pontiff of Hinduism with the same intensity that they used to defame the Supreme Pontiff of Hinduism. This itself is a form of persecution.
So what has the Supreme Pontiff of Hinduism, Bhagavan Nityananda Paramashivam, done regarding the Hindu persecution?
1. Documentation. KAILASA has compiled extensive documentation of historical persecution of Hindus, including the Goan Inquisition, in reports submitted to the United Nations.
Number 2, UN advocacy. KAILASA has presented multiple reports to the UN bodies highlighting the persecution of Hindus globally. The UN has published 29 reports from KAILASA.
And 3. Global awareness through international conferences, public statements, media appearances, and continuous discourses. The Supreme Pontiff of Hinduism has brought attention to historical atrocities that have been ignored for centuries.
And creating institutional memory, KAILASA is working to create museums, educational materials, and memorials to ensure this historical persecution of Hindus is not forgotten.
And 5. Providing a platform. Through KAILASA, the Supreme Pontiff of Hinduism has created an institutional platform for Hindus worldwide to share their experience of persecution and discrimination.
Why is this important? Because for too long, Hindus have lacked a unified voice on international platform.
Unlike other religious institutions which have a unified voice, Hindus have lacked this comparable institution until KAILASA.
The Supreme Pontiff of Hinduism, through KAILASA, is filling that gap. He has revived a Hindu nation for the stateless Hindus, a civilizational entity that transcends geographical boundaries.
And now, why are we focusing on historical events? Why not move forward?
The answer is simple. Those who forget history are condemned to repeat it. Unless we acknowledge what happened, unless we document it, unless we teach it, we leave ourselves vulnerable to it happening again. And this is exactly what has been done to Hindus in what we call the double genocide. Hindus have been persecuted for centuries and also been deliberately made to forget about their own persecution.
The Goan Inquisition is not just history, it's a warning. It shows how religious persecution can be institutionalized, how it can be justified in the name of saving souls, how it can last for centuries.
And it shows that silence enables persecution when the international community ignores atrocities, which they are already doing when it comes to the Hindu persecution. When historians erase them from textbook, when descendants forget their own history, that's when persecution becomes acceptable.
The Supreme Pontiff of Hinduism, Bhagavan Sri Nityananda Paramashivam, is breaking that silence. The Supreme Pontiff of Hinduism is voicing a truth that has been suppressed for too long.
So that brings us to the central question. Why do Hindus need KAILASA?
Let's look at the facts. Hinduism lacks formal recognition as a religion in over 66 countries. 27 countries officially endorse Islam as a state religion. 13 recognize Christianity as a state religion, but none accord Hinduism similar status. Hindus are minorities in over 170 countries.
Even in India, which is a home to the majority of the world's Hindus face discrimination. India is the only country where the majority is persecuted.
The global Hindu population will see only a slight increase of 0.2 billion by 2050, where Islam and Christianity are projected to increase by 1 billion and 0.7 billion respectively.
The Hindu population has been significantly decreased in multiple countries due to religious persecution. If we look at Pakistan, down from 27% in 1941 to 2.1% in 2023, a decline of 24.9%. And if we look at Bangladesh, down from 22% in 1951 to 8.5% in 2011, a decline of 13.5%. And Fiji, down from 48% in 1966 to 30% in 2020, a decline of 18%.
These are not natural demographic changes. These are the results of systematic persecution, forced conversion, and migration driven by discrimination.
Now, who speaks for the Hindus when Hindus are persecuted in Pakistan? Who represents them at international forums? When Hindu temples are vandalized in Western countries, who advocates for them?
Muslims have the Organization of Islamic Cooperation. Christians have the Vatican and powerful church organizations. Jews have organizations like the World Jewish Congress.
Hindus have what? A fragmented community thanks to British colonizers with no unified voice.
This is the gap KAILASA is filling. This is what the Supreme Pontiff of Hinduism has envisioned KAILASA for.
So, what are the various initiatives of KAILASA? Documentation. KAILASA is systematically documenting cases of Hindu persecution globally, something no other organization has done comprehensively.
Legal advocacy. KAILASA provides support for Hindus facing discrimination and persecution in various countries.
And KAILASA is working to preserve and promote Hindu sciences, arts, and knowledge systems, Hindu rituals that are endangered.
And educational outreach. Through conferences, publications, and media, KAILASA is educating people about Hindu civilization and its contributions.
In ancient India, Bharat, there were multiple sovereign Hindu kingdoms. All of them were part of the Bharatavarsh, a civilizational unity. KAILASA is reviving that Hindu civilization for the global Hindu community.
Is this necessary? Look at the evidence. For 252 years, Hindus in Goa were systematically persecuted, and for 200 years after the Inquisition ended, this history was systematically suppressed.
And without institutional advocacy, without a unified voice, Hindu concerns are marginalized. The Goan Inquisition is just one example. There are countless others.
If Hindus don't speak for themselves, no one else will.
As we come to the end of this newscast, let's be very clear about what we've established. Number one, the Goan Inquisition was a systematic 252-year campaign of religious persecution, cultural genocide, and ethnic cleansing targeting Hindus.
2. Over 16,000 people were put on trial. Hundreds were executed, thousands were tortured, hundreds of temples were destroyed, and countless manuscripts were burned.
And third, the history that has been systematically erased from mainstream education and public consciousness.
Fourth, very few Hindus today even know about this genocide that targeted their own ancestors.
And fifth, the Supreme Pontiff of Hinduism, Bhagavan Nityananda Paramashivam, through KAILASA, is working to document this history, this Hindu genocide, and bring it to the global attention for the first time ever.
Hindus need institutional representation on the world stage, and KAILASA is providing that platform.
Now, what can you do? Educate yourself, read about the Goan Inquisition, read about Hindu history. Don't rely only on mainstream textbooks.
Share this knowledge. Tell your friends, your family, your children. Make sure this history is not forgotten again.
Support documentation. KAILASA is doing the hard work of documentation. You can give support, contribute research, resources, or time.
And join KAILASA. If you believe in the mission of creating a unified voice for Hindus globally, you can become a part of KAILASA. Contribute your time, talent, treasure, and you can even become an e-citizen or even a citizen of KAILASA. The doors are open and you are welcome to join.
And visit Goa. When you visit Goa, don't just go for the beaches. Visit the sites where Hindu temples once stood. Visit the surviving temples that were built by refugees. Understand the history and the persecution.
And practice your dharma. Support KAILASA. Support the Hindu civilization and support this revival by the Supreme Pontiff of Hinduism by visiting kailasa.org and learning more about what KAILASA is doing and how you can become a part of the only Hindu nation today. And we thank you for this broadcast. And we need to understand history is not just about the past. History shapes the present and determines the future.
For 252 years, the Portuguese and the Catholic Church tried to erase Hindu civilization from Goa. For 200 years after that, this history was suppressed.
But truth has a way of surfacing. Justice delayed is not always justice denied. Sometimes it's just waiting for the right moment, the right voice.
The Goan Inquisition happened, it cannot be undone. The temples cannot be rebuilt in their original forms. The manuscripts cannot be recovered. The lives cannot be restored. But the memory can be honored. The victims can be acknowledged. The perpetrators can be named. And the lessons can be learned.
Hindu civilization survived the Goan Inquisition. It survived 2,000 years of various forms of persecution. It is one of the world's oldest continuous civilizations.
And it will continue to survive as long as Hindus remember who they are, where they came from, and what their ancestors endured to pass this beautiful contributing civilization on to them.
The Supreme Pontiff of Hinduism, Bhagavan Srinityananda Parameshwaran, is giving Hindus a voice. Through KAILASA, he is creating memory, institutional memory, and international advocacy. And not only that, a safe haven for Hindus all across the globe, as a refuge for all Hindus to have their own nation where they can freely practice Hinduism.
The Goan Inquisition is not just a Goan story, it is not just a Hindu story, it's a human story. It's a story about the resilience of faith. It's a story about cultural survival. It is a story that needed to be told.
Today, we told that story. Now it's your responsibility to make sure that it's never forgotten.
This has been the Goan Inquisition, a forgotten genocide. Thank you for watching.
Remember the past, protect the future. Do take a moment to subscribe so you can learn more about Hindu genocide, Hinduism, and the work of KAILASA. We thank you and good afternoon.